Henley.
Welcome to the show, Walter.
Well, thank you, Ron. I'm glad to be here.
So the first game we're going to look at is your game with Arthur Bisguier from the 1974 U.S. Championship. In those days, you still played one E4.
Yeah, I played it up to around 1976, and I had a lot of success with it.
So Bisguier played the Petrov's defense. Very solid, very drawish opening.
Yeah, it is.
You played knight takes E5. He played D6. Knight back to F3. Knight takes E4. D4. D5. Bishop D3. Bishop E7. Castles. Knight C6. Now this is all pretty much standard theory up to here, right, Walter?
Yeah. This is pretty much the main thing they played in those days.
So now, of course, you want to try and destroy his knight in the center. So
right. I want to dislodge his knight.
So you played C4, and he has various things he can do. Knight F6 is solid, but a little passive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he played very aggressively to counterattack your bishop with knight B4. And now you played C takes D5, and he took your bishop.
Yeah. Well,
after queen takes.
Queen takes, yeah.
Now he took the pawn on D5. And you attacked his knight. And you said this, of course, is a key moment in the game.
Yeah, it is, because, well, first of all, if he moves his knight back, knight C3, attacking the queen, is a nice tempo. Okay. And we've got that pin on the bishop.
Knight here.
Yeah.
Right?
And where could he go with his queen? If he goes back to, well, he moves his queen D5 after that, or bishop G5, gives white a nice initiative. And knight D6 is more or less the same. Knight D6, knight C3, queen C4, we just take a knight D5, and that's most unpleasant.
Okay.
For black. So F5 would have the first problem is I could just play knight C3, and after a trade, E5 is very weak. Bishop G5 is threatened, black can't castle, and rook E5 is also possible.
And the pin on the E file is very bad.
Very strong. It's winning position. Also, C pawn is hanging.
Now here's your host, International Grandmaster Ron Henley.
To win the chess championship of the United States even once must be considered by an American player to be a moment to relish in his or her chess career. In this show, I have the honor and privilege of introducing my longtime and very good friend, Walter Browne, who has accomplished this feat an amazing 6 times. Only the immortal Bobby Fischer himself has surpassed this impressive total of championship victories. During the show, Walter will share with you his high points and key games from these 6 championships that have been forever etched in the annals of American chess folklore. Walter, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, the next game that we're going to look at is with Yasser Seirawan from the 1980 U.S. Championship. This was, in fact, Walter's 4th victory in the U.S. Championship. And you're playing black. You played your favorite hedgehog. Yasser played knight F3, knight F6, C4, B6. Now, of course, with the hedgehog, you can either get a Queen's Indian or a hedgehog formation, depending on how white responds. So he played G3, bishop B7, bishop G2, C5, castles, E6, knight C3, bishop E7, D4, CD4. Now, first off, Walter, he takes with the queen. The natural recapture would be to seem to take with the knight.
Yeah, but that doesn't give anything to white. It's
you just exchange bishops.
Just exchange, and then you can play queen C7, and maybe you'll check on B7, and or knight C6.
So in the game, Yasser, of course, playing to try and develop some initiative white. Mm-hmm. He takes with the queen. Now, the tempting thing would be to play knight C6, but after queen F4, this is another way to play.
Yeah, and well, that just wasn't my style. Somebody like De Fermian plays that way all the time.
So you played D6, maintaining, more flexibility. So he plays rook D1, and now you play A6, Can you kind of explain? I mean, this is called the hedgehog formation. You're kind of crouched in on the third rank. But exactly what is...
Now here's your host, International Grandmaster Ron Henley.
E4 is considered to be White's most direct attempt to develop an initiative and capitalize on the advantage of the first move to open a chess game. With C5, the Sicilian defense, Black creates an immediate imbalance and signifies his philosophy of dynamic counterplay. Bent Larson once said, "When you play an opening, it is nice to have some ideas, but it is also important to have some concrete variations." In this video, Walter will do exactly that. By building you a complete system, he will provide you with his favorite methods and variations for obtaining counterplay.
Go.
So Walter, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, Ron.
So Walter, what do you think is exactly the biggest single problem with the Najdorf Sicilian?
Well, probably the biggest problem is just that people don't allow it that much. I went for a few years, actually, in the late 70s, where I'd go to tournaments. I was well prepared, and nobody even played E4 against me, let alone the Najdorf.
So for people that do play E4 and don't allow the Sicilian, I think that's a very good point, Walter. We need to really help them prepare against these anti-Najdorf systems.
Yeah, well, before you can play the Najdorf, you have to be ready for all the little variations and all the tricks that White can pull to avoid it. Because I would say that almost half of the games I have, people are playing these odd lines against it.
Walter, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Ron.
And then exactly why did you take up the Sicilian Najdorf?
Well, I took it up in the late 60s because I wanted something really dynamic. Basically, I like to play to win every game, and I don't like draws or dull positions, so I wanted something super dynamic, and the Sicilian is the most complex defense against E4, and the Najdorf is the most complicated variation.
Tell me, what do you think roughly would be your lifetime winning percentage in tournament play with the Najdorf defense?
Well, I'm not sure exactly, but probably around 85 to 90%.
Let's look at the mainline Najdorf itself. I know that's what you've been really waiting to show us. Okay, so now White has a number of ways that he can go about playing for an advantage in the mainline Najdorf. Where should we start with?
I think we should start with Bishop E2 because that's probably the most popular line against the mainline Najdorf right there. And then I would say E5 is the sharper way to handle it. E6 is basically, when you play E6, Ron, sooner or later, White's going to play F4, and you're basically, after knight C6, later in the game, thinking about how do I get E5 in and equalize the game. So why not play it right away, if it works?
Okay. Does it work?
I believe so. Knight B3. Knight F3 is an alternative. It's kind of a dubious alternative we're not going to deal with here. Knight B3 is almost played about 90% of the time. And then Bishop E7. Now White castles and Black castles. These first 8 moves almost always go like this. And now White has some choices here. He can play Bishop E3, F4, or A4. So let's look at the main one because, well, let's look at F4. Then B5, A4, Bishop B7. And now, in this position, White can exchange on B5 and then on A8 if he wishes. But in this position, if he plays with the knight on B5, we play knight takes E4. If he takes with the bishop, we can play knight takes E4 also, and say knight takes, and then bishop takes E4. And Black is better for several reasons. One, he has a better central pawn formation. Number two, he's threatening queen B6 check, hitting and winning the bishop on B5 with the check. So the white king is slightly exposed. Even when the white king moves to H1, the diagonal is open between A8 and H1. And plus, Black is just equal in development and has a fine position.
A firm favourite of such dynamic world champions as Bobby Fischer and Garry Kasparov, the Sicilian Najdorf, E4, C5, knight out to f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight out to f6, knight c3, and now the move a6 is one of Black's most aggressive answers to 1e4. On this video I'm going to show you all you need to know to start playing the Najdorf with confidence. Why waste time learning some second-rate defence when you can play the Cadillac of Sicilians? The rub is that you don't even need to know much theory to play it. The modern interpretation of the Najdorf is to play e6, after which these pawns on d6 and e6 are both flexible and incredibly solid. Depending on circumstances, Black might later play either d5 or e5. Meanwhile, Black can expand on the queen side with b5, after which White's e-pawn can find itself under unexpected pressure with moves like b4 or bishop b7 in the air, hitting this pawn. If White plays routinely, he can suddenly find himself having to play moves like f3 to defend the pawn on e4 and a3 to stop b5 to b4. Black can intensify his pressure on White's game by going, say, knight out to c6 or knight d7, followed by bringing his rook onto the half-open c-file with rook c8. For this reason, White is virtually forced into a life-or-death struggle by playing sharply, which is why the Najdorf has found favour with grandmasters such as Fischer, Kasparov and many others. I'm going to deal with White's sixth move alternatives in decreasing order of aggression. First of all, I'll show you a simple way to defuse the notoriously sharp bishop g5. Against the move bishop out to c4, I'll show you a line with which you can actually capture this dangerous bishop. And against the English attack with bishop e3, we'll see something which has started to make White players think again whether or not they should really bring this bishop out here at this early stage. The move 6f4 has been recommended by John Nunn in his trilogy on beating the Sicilian, but I don't think it's as dangerous as many White players believe. Finally, we'll go on to White's quieter alternatives such as bishop e2, h3 and g3, but these are really nothing to worry about.
Hello everyone, I'm Andrew Martin and welcome to this 60 minutes video on the Najdorf Sicilian. Is it possible to condense the theory of such a highly analysed opening into 60 minutes to make it accessible and attractive for the average player? Well, I believe it is, and on this short DVD I'm going to show you how it's done. The Sicilian Najdorf occurs after the following moves. White plays e4, Black plays c5, knight f3 d6, and now d4, reaching the open Sicilian. White allows Black to take and destroy his centre in return for active piece play. And now the Najdorf Sicilian is introduced with the move a6. The Najdorf is a flexible opening, and I think that's why it has stood the test of time. In particular, Black has a lot of flexibility with his pawns. The original idea of a6 was to prepare the move pawn up to e5, and that's a very popular approach in many of the main lines. Basically, Black's trying to get a position which is superior to that of the Sveshnikov or Pelican variation, because after e5 the white knight can't come to b5, which is the most aggressive square. However, practice has shown that there are a lot more opportunities for Black using his pawns in this variation. For instance, Black need not play e5, he can play with e6 in a lot of the lines. He can play with g6 in a lot of the lines. And he can play b5 or b6 according to circumstances and fit his pieces around each of those pawn structures. And it's that elasticity which I think has given the Black position durability. over many, many years. Most of the world champions have used the Najdorf. It's a highly theoretical opening. So is it possible to condense the theory into an hour? Is it possible to get you up and running with this opening in 1 hour? Well, I believe it is. And here's how I'm going to do it. We're going to take a look at most of the main lines. I say most. I'm going to show you all of the most popular lines for white. The side lines you might have to flesh out for yourselves. There are many moves that white has played in this position. But in general, the most popular moves are bishop to g5, which is probably white's most aggressive idea. Bishop to e3, the English attack, a very dangerous system. Bishop to e2, the classical system, a favourite of Anatoly Karpov. Pawn up to f4, bit old-fashioned these days, but still very dangerous. And finally, bishop to c4, the Sozin variation. And we're going to take a look at each of these systems. As I say, there are other moves for white, quite a few of them, but they're irregular and uncommon. Let's go back to a6. Now the approach I'm going to recommend is an almost universal one, in that irrespective of what white plays, I'm going to recommend that black puts his knight on d7 and then follows up with g6, reaching a hybrid of the Najdorf, the dragon, and it's an approach which is very modern and which has been very successful in recent grandmaster play. If grandmasters are using it, there's no reason why you shouldn't use it, and we're going to see how it works now. Well, as we've got bishop g5 on the board, we may as well look at this first. Now bishop g5 is white's most aggressive move. It sets up the immediate idea of bishop takes f6. There are lines where black dares white to go through with that move, but in general black tries to avoid double pawns. So he either plays pawn to e6, which is the most common move, or he plays knight bd7. This move was in the doldrums for a long while. We're talking way back in the 1960s, where Spassky duffed up Petrosian in this line in a World Championship match, I think, and for a long time it was completely out of fashion. But modern masters are reintroducing this move with great success, and it's all because of the move g6. Now we're going to take a look at f4 first, because this is the way white usually arranges his pieces and pawns after bishop g5. And my first game comes from Gothenburg, played in August 2018 between Grandmaster Thomas Ernst, playing with white, who I seem to remember was very theoretical, very well prepared, and he's playing Vasily Nedilko, a player graded 2370 of IM standard, I think. And Ernst continued with queen to f3.
Hello, my name is Roman Djindjihashvili, and this is highly unusual video, unusual from all others, different from all other videos we have made. And the reason why it's unusual, because what we're covering here, one of the most controversial and most popular opening variations, maybe in the last half a century, Najdorf Sicilian. Najdorf Sicilian is so well explored. There some variations are known up to like 30 moves. And nevertheless, what's amazing is that game collection I have for you is played in the last several months. They were played in a very, very high level. So some only IMs or GMs. And you see there are still some tactical possibilities that were missed by one side or the other right after the opening. The second the opening ends, there is some missed opportunities. And that does not surprise me. That shows how rich is the opening with all kind of tactical resources for both sides. The collection I found is, I knew how rich was the Najdorf Sicilian, but when I looked the games, I've been collecting this for a few months, and it amazed me how many possibilities. I knew there were a lot, but I was amazed myself how much is a lot. And I will present you few of them. So let's look. E4, C5, it's a first game. The interesting point I want to make, first game was played between Michael Brooks, international master, and Julio Becerra, grandmaster. Knight F3, D6, D4, CD, knight takes D4, knight F6, knight C3, A6. In this position, White plays move that was popular maybe 10 years ago, but not anymore. F4. It's a very playable move, and the most popular response to this is E5, which was not played. E6 was played. This is also the option that black always has, and on bishop E2, knight C6, bishop E3, we get type of Scheveningen variation. Castling, king H1, all regular moves, typical moves of the Sicilian defense. And in this particular game, what's amazing is how quickly black got in trouble. It's move 11. This position happened, I imagine, is at least several thousand times. And in this position, black made a move, not very successful, not very good move, rook c8. Now, you can ask me why rook c8 is not a good move. The reason why rook c8 is not a very good move is this. We have typical position for Sicilian, and rook c8 is a typical move, one of the standard moves. But in this